Hello, everyone. Today we are continuing on with our particle discussion. We had our first major chapter on particles last week, and we are jumping into the next one. Real fast, before we do that, there's one thing that, for those of you that have been doing these lessons with me for a while, it sounds like a broken record, but there's something I use to refer to particles. There's a way I describe to them. The way I describe them. Does anyone remember what that is? I call them these. My particles are like this. What is that thing? Signpost. Thank you. And just in case some of you weren't in previous lessons and you don't know what I'm talking about, I keep hitting this term, signposts, because particles often are not actually part of the sentence in the sense that we assign a translation to it. It's not always the case, but it's often where the particle is pointing to a word and saying, hey, I'm not actually part of this. I'm just a sign pointing to that over there, but I'm going to let you know what that word's doing. What the purpose of that word is in this sentence. And you'll see that continues on with today, but just, keep that in mind. And because we are talking about two particles that are involved with locations, I want to jump back real fast and review the location particle that we discussed last week. Does anyone remember what it was that we talked about last time? Which particle was it that described a location? Specifically, the location that something happens, the location of an action. So if I say I'm eating, or I eat at a restaurant, or I eat at home, what particle will I be using to describe that in Japanese? What am I going to stick next to home or restaurant or in front of a 7-Eleven? De. Thank you. So yes, it is de. And again, you can look at our previous lesson inside of Renshu if you want to check that out. But de is used to, I'm going to give you a quick example. I was freezing the other day and I stepped inside of a 7-Eleven in Japan, and a lot of them, especially the larger ones, actually have spots. You can sit down and eat the food that you buy there. And it was a nice little vacation from the cold outside, so I jumped in. And we usually say, here in Japan, we just say seven. Instead of 7-Eleven, we just say seven. Seven de tabemasu. I eat, or in my case, I ate at 7 or 7-Eleven. So we're going to be talking about more actions today, but we're going to see that we're not actually using the de anymore. We're going to talk about two new particles, ni and e. And before we go any further, I want you to tell me if you heard something strange just now when I pronounce those two particles, ni and e. Ni and e. If you're wondering what I'm referring to, it's on the screen, but I'll go ahead and type them into the channel. Ni and e. There's no H in e. Right. And you might notice that there's a pattern here. It's with particles, you start to see this not more often than not, but we have the wa, we have the ha, that's pronounced wa, but only when it's as a particle. Only when it's a particle. Otherwise, we say ha normally. And the e, or he, is pronounced e when we're using it as a particle. If it's part of a word, for example, room, this is hea. We'd say hea. You wouldn't say ea. That sounds like air, but hea. However, when it's a particle, and you might wonder, how do I tell when it's a particle or not? One thing you'll notice, it's harder to notice at the beginning when you're first getting started. But as you get further on in Japanese, you start to learn kanji. And I bet a number of you have already began your kanji studies. And once you learn kanji, you use kanji whenever you can because, everyone else does. And so no one writes hea unless it's a children's book. They will write hea, the kanji. And whenever you have kanji, throughout the sentence, all of a sudden that that comes after a kanji block looks much more obvious. It just leaps out and says, hey, I'm a particle. Don't pronounce me the wrong way. Of course, when you're getting started, you might see something like this, heia e, and you'll say, wait, which one's which? But that actually kanji is one of those things that it is hard to get a grasp of when you first get started, but it makes life, as far as Japanese is concerned, it makes life so much easier. So if that's frustrating to you now, we understand it happens to all of us, has happened, is happening, will happen to all of us, and it does get better. So these two are used when we are talking about the person, the subject, going somewhere. So these are used to mark locations, but they're not the locations where the action is happening. They're locations where the action is going or coming to. If I'm here in my room, I could say I'm talking in my room, and I would use the de particle to mark that. But if I'm about to go to 7-Eleven and get some coffee, I would use this to describe that I'm not at 7 now. I am going to 7. And these are the two particles that we would use. Now, there's 3 verbs. These are not the only verbs that you can use with the a and ni particles, but they're the 3 most common. And I don't have any information to back this up with, but I would say when you see a and when you see ni being used in this fashion, it's iku, kairu, or kuru, maybe, I'm going to say 90% of the time, if not 95%. These are used so much in Japanese that if they're new to you, they won't be new for long. They'll get in your head and they'll be stuck in there. So the 3 that we have, and you can see on the screen, is iku, which is to go, kuru, which is to come, and I'm reading them out of order, sorry, kairu, which is to return. And if some of you are thinking, I also know this other word that means return, modoru, we'll talk about that after. It's not explicitly in this lesson, but we'll definitely mention it, so don't worry about that. But we have iku, kairu, and kuru. And as to when you use specific ones, we will also talk about that. But these are all, and I'm going to call them verbs of motion. They're verbs of motion because they describe movement. And not just movement as in, hey, I'm waving my arms. They're movement as in I'm moving from one location to another. And with those comes the a and ni. So before we jump into the full sentence, real fast, the first 2 are those actually, this is wrong. It is right. It's right. I'm sorry. My brain just fell asleep. The first 2 are godan verbs, which means, real fast, this is a review for you all. It's on the screen, but just in case you haven't read it yet, how would we say, instead of iku, how would we say I go? Or he goes or she goes. What would be the mas form of iku? Feel free to cheat and look on the screen. Yes, ikimasu. That ku changes to a ki, and then you have the mas afterwards. And kairu as well, to return home, is also godan. So what would the mas form of that be? Thank you. And most of you know this, but if one person is typing the answer and they get, you're typing it too and they beat you to it, you should still type it. You definitely should. Typing it out is another form of, wiring together those neurons in your head and getting that further ingrained into your brain. There's no such thing, at least in my class, as too many people. And Honey Road, I'll point you to the lesson at the end of the end of today's lesson that goes into it in specifics. But there's two types of verbs, and depending on if it's ichidan, which we don't have today, or godan, it describes how those verbs change, when we change them to the different forms. And just hold on, we're only doing the mas forms today, so the only ones we'll be using is ikimasu, kaerimasu, and then kimasu, which I'm about to do. So just hold on to these 3 for now, and at the end of the lesson, I'll let you know where you can get a lot more information on it. It's one of those words where if you're like me, I hate grammar terminology. It bothers me when I'm studying, but this is one that I ignored when I was learning and I wish I didn't. It's one that you should get it in your head because it really helps out. But don't worry, we'll cover it at the end. So we have ikimasu, we have kaerimasu, and then kuru is, if you recall from our other conjugation lessons, it's one of the two special verbs. So kuru becomes kimasu. So these are the not pronunciations, these are the conjugations that we're going to be using. And let's continue with the sentence. Now, like I said, these are, if I go somewhere, I'm going from A to B. Or if I come somewhere, I'm coming from somewhere, to where I am now. Or someone else is coming from where they are to where I am. Same with returning or returning home. And so we don't use de. We're using this to speak about the moving. The motion from one place to another place. And although a lot of particles don't have translations, if, this one is typically two. It's typically two in a sentence. So, the example I was talking about before, if I go to 7-Eleven, in English, we would say I go to 7-Eleven. Or I came to the school. It's often to in English. Not always, though. I return or returned home. There's no to in there. So you're not always going to get that clean translation. So I wouldn't expect it. I wouldn't rely on it. Now, there's two particles here. There's ni and then there's a. And we're going to talk about the difference between the two. But one thing you should know, and this is one of the things where I can hear you groaning even though all your mics are off. For those of you that are learning this for the first time, particles have multiple uses. Ni is one of the particularly bad offenders in this case, and that I think Renshu has, I know Renshu's dictionary is not completely exhaustive, but I want to say Renshu's ni page has, I think, 8 or 9 different usages of ni. And that seems crazy. The one we talked about before is we used it for time. So we said if we go to sleep at 9 o'clock, then we say kuji ni, or to give you the full sentence, kuji ni nemasu. And the good thing, though, is, with trying to figure out which one it is, it's usually pretty obvious from, the sentence. Because if you have a time, you're not going to a time or coming to a time. And vice versa, a store or 7-Eleven or my house or the park can't be the time at which something happens. It's a place. So if you see a location, a place, followed by ni, followed by a, we're talking about movement. Generally. As long as those verbs come after the iku, the kaeru, or the kuru, we're talking about motion. And this is a little mnemonic. The author here, I didn't write this one, but the author that put it in, if it helps you, ni usually means two. And ni also means two in Japanese, the number. And so that might help you tie those two together. We already talked about a. Okay, let's get into some sentences. So first we have a word which I believe we've talked about before. But just in case, does anyone know what... This is one that doesn't always come up in textbooks. Uchi. What does uchi mean? Or what can it mean? It means home and or house. You're both correct. And generally speaking, uchi refers to the home or the house of the speaker. Whoever's speaking. And so, it does mean house because you typically live in a house or an apartment, and you might refer to it as home in English. But it's usually, if you say uchi, you're usually talking about yourself. If you're talking about someone else, you might add the honorific, the o, and you say ochi, which sounds kind of strange because you might have learned if you have an O and then an U sound afterwards, the O gets extended. That's not the case here. This one is ochi. And if you're having a hard time hearing that, here's if I were to extend it, it would sound like ochi. Ochi. But with this one, it's ochi. 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 Now that I'm saying it myself, it sounds strange coming out of my mouth, but that's how you say it. So anyway, it means house. And all you have to do is remember our signposts, our particles, point to the left always. So this ni is pointing to uchi. And it's saying, there's no subject here. So we assume it's I, because the speaker is talking or writing. So uchi ni kaerimasu is I return home. Mise e ikimasu is I go to the store. Now, we're going to practice a whole bunch of these, a whole bunch. But before we do that, I want to point out a few things. You're probably wondering what the difference between ni and a is. Like, why did I use ni in the first one? Why did I use a in the second one? The answer is you can actually use either, at least in these two sentences. You can use either. Ni tends to be more common, by far. By far. I'd say at least 9 times out of 10, ni is used and not a. In fact, I feel like a is kind of rare, especially at a beginner's level. But if you're pointing at a destination, you can use ni and you can use a. So I'm going to type that out. It's not written exactly in here. So you can do this. If you're marking the destination, you can use a, you can use ni. However, if you were talking about a direction that you are heading, and notice how I kind of changed the word. Instead of going, I said heading. Now there's another word that means heading in Japanese, but if you're focused on a direction, which is not a destination, so if you're going east, if you're heading east, if you say drive east for, 10 kilometers, then it changes a bit. With a direction, you cannot use ni. You can only use a. So real fast, a few of the direction verbs, or not verbs, excuse me. A few of the direction words, just in case you don't know them. Let's learn them right now. Does anyone know what north is? So if you say, I'm going to drive north, I'm going, yeah. And let's go around the map. East, around the compass. East is higashi. Yes. South is minami. Thank you. And some of you, if you're thinking, oh, I'm writing in Romaji, I really shouldn't be. We don't care here. You type in whatever way works best for you. And some people just don't have Japanese installed on their computers, or they don't want to bother with it. That's fine. That's completely fine. And last one, west. Nishi. Cool. So if you are heading in these directions, you can use a, or you can only use a. And you might be talking about head right, head left, go straight, head backwards. And in these situations, you would also use a, because you are referring to the direction that you are going in. If you're heading to a destination, which is what we usually talk about, then you can use ni or you can use a. But typically, you're going to see ni most of the time. You'll see ni most of the time. And if you wonder, if you ask yourself, so why would I even use a if I'm talking about a destination? So let's look at 2 sentences real fast. Let's do mise ni ikimasu. Let's do mise being store. Now we're dealing with very simple sentences. Of course, we're beginners. We're just getting started. However, why would you choose one over the other? There must be a difference, right? And there is. With simple sentences, it usually doesn't make a difference. However, another way I like to think of it, this was told to me many years ago, is that, like I said, ni is focused on the destination, and A is focused on the direction. Another way you could think of it, it's focused on the movement. As in, if you're going from A to B, from your house to the store, ni is focused on the store. You're getting to that store. A is focused on everything in between. From your house to the store, all that stuff in between. So A might be used more often if you're talking about, I was heading to the store, I was going to the store, and on the way, a car splashed me with water. It's something that happened en route. And the sentence I said, for beginners, you probably wouldn't be able to put that into Japanese because you're using multiple clauses, you're using the present progressive ing, a lot of extra stuff. That's why A doesn't really make as much of a splash in the beginning. But later on, you start saying, man, I was on the way to the store and, a Pokemon just leapt out in front of me. Wow, Japan is great. You might have, I hope that happens to me one day. And then A becomes much more appropriate. But until then, don't worry about it. So, we have our sentence, which I already put up. Mise ni ikimasu. I go to the store. And let's focus on this one. This is really simple practice. It might even seem too simple to you. But even simple practice takes a concept that's in your head and makes it easier to pull out next time. So what I'd like you to do, if you want to, is tell me where is somewhere you're going to go today, tomorrow, next week, whatever. You don't need to tell me when. You can put a time if you'd like, but it's not required. So just say, I hope this is true. I like restaurants. But restaurant ni ikimasu. I will go to a restaurant. What about you? Let's focus with just ikimasu right now, just going. Where is somewhere you'll go? And if you aren't planning to go anywhere, or if you're snowed in, just make something up. Say if you weren't snowed in, or if you did have time, or whatever, where would you go? So let me know. Let's try using this. Feel free to put the watashi wa in front if you want to. But again, it's pretty clear that if you're talking about yourself, so it's not required. So I'll give you a minute or so if you'd like to type out a sentence. If you want to say you're going somewhere, but you don't know how to say that where that is, let me know. Let us know. We'd be happy to help you. If you want to say you're going to the art museum or going to the, the concert hall, whatever. Let us know. Nibutsu is continuing with last week's theme and going to the moon, which, based on today's weather, might be warmer than where I am right now. Kaori is going to the konbini, which, if you've heard good things about Japanese konbinis, they're not wrong. Japanese konbinis are amazing compared to convenience stores in other countries. Although, if anyone ever gets me talking outside of a lesson, I'm of the belief that COVID really knocked konbini sideways. And due to COVID plus inflation, they're not as good as they used to be in terms of food quality. But that's a sad discussion for another day. Shoyu is getting ahead of themselves and saying that they're going to go to heaven. Hopefully not too soon. But I'll give you about 30 more seconds. If you have any other sentences, give it a shot. There's no problem with making a mistake here. And I'll be right back. Emiru, is that Sanrio as in the company Sanrio? Cool. I have not been there, and I'm not a huge Sanrio fan, but any of those places that are set up for a single brand of toys and merchandise, they're awesome. Whether it's Sanrio or Pokemon or whatever, they're always fun to go into, even if you're not interested in that particular thing. They're just so well put together. My son we're a few hours away, but my son's very excited to go to the Pokemon store, which I think might be Sendai, might be the closest one to us. We'll see. Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep talking. So with, this ni refers to the direction that we're going or the destination. And we're starting to get slightly more complex sentences. So you can even use both of the ni particles at the same time. And so you could say, kuji ni mise ni ikimasu. At 9 o'clock, I go to the store. And if you look at the sentence, hopefully you'll agree with what I said earlier, is that even though there's two ni's here, based on the word that comes in front of them, it becomes pretty clear what that ni is doing. That first ni is marking the time. The second ni is marking where you're going. Kuji ni mise ni ikimasu. And so this is an extremely useful phrase. And, you can drop in whatever location you want to put, otera, like a temple, school, the station, and it can be a location big or small. Someone in the channel just put Japan, Nihon ni ikimasu, that's fine. Whether it's something gigantic or something as small as a room or the corner of a room, that's fine. All of these are locations, big or small. You can use them with ni. Now, let's talk about these other words. We have ikimasu, which means to go, and then we have kimasu, which means to come. So, when do you use them? When do you use each one? And it might be clear to you, obvious to you, based on English, your own language, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about it just a little bit. So, ikimasu is referring to going away from the speaker's current location. So if I say mise ni ikimasu, we're focused on convenience stores today. So if I say mise ni ikimasu, 7 ni ikimasu, where am I now? I, the speaker. I am not at 7. I am somewhere else. So ikimasu means to go somewhere where you are not. Going away from the speaker's location. Mise ni ikimasu. So when do you use kimasu? When do you use kimasu? The sentence in front of us, the sentence that's on the screen, and I'm just going to retype it as mise. Let's keep it simple. This sentence you actually don't hear that often. And let's think about why. Mise ni ikimasu. Kimasu, or to come, is to, go to the speaker's location. So whoever's speaking, it's showing a movement to their location, which if it's you, that's kind of strange because you're already there, right? You're already there. You might speak about coming to the store if you are already at the store. For example, if you're me and you made the bad mistake of getting into Pokemon cards and you go to the store and you try and buy the new set that's out and they're out. And you say, okay, all right, I'll come again tomorrow. If I was to say that, I'll say ashita mata kimasu. Ashita is tomorrow, mata is again. And I'm already at the store, so I'll say I'll come again tomorrow. So it's going to the speaker's location. Now, this is much easier to use when you're talking about someone else. So let's say I'm at the store And let's say they have whatever set is that I'm trying to get. And for some reason, it's worth calling my son, who's 6 years old. He probably can't come on his own, but let's say he could. Let's say he's capable of grabbing a taxi or walking over here. And I say, don't sell those cards because my son is coming soon. And my son, as some of you know, his name is Leo. I might say, Leo wa kimasu. Leo will come. Or if we want to extend it out and talk about where we are now, Leo wa koko ni kimasu. Leo will come here. So I, the speaker, I am where the destination is. Iku is the destination, is not where the speaker is. Kuru or kimasu, the speaker is at that place. So they're usually talking about someone else coming to that location. And I just kind of jumped ahead and, already talked about what was in here. So if I said, Kare wa mise ni ikimasu, Kare, whoever he is, he's not at the store yet. He's not at the store yet, he's going to the store. The second sentence, Kare wa mise ni ikimasu, he's coming to the store and I'm there, I guess, waiting for him. Now, those two are relatively easy. Kaerimasu or kaeru, to return, can throw some people off. It can throw some people off. So, most people learn it this way. Kaeru means to return home. And please raise your hand if this is how you learned it. Okay, you can put your hand down. Probably most of you did that, if you bothered to raise your hand. Most people learn it as to return home. This is not actually true. This is not actually true. Kaeru is to return home or somewhere like home. So what does that mean? Somewhere like home. Usually we use it to refer to home. So let me give you some examples. Oops, that's not hiragana. So I might say uchi ni kaerimasu. I return home. This is your most common example because your house presumably is your home. Now let's say you're a student, you're living out in a dorm. You'd probably say ryo ni kaerimasu. I go back to the dorms. And notice I changed it to I go back, but that means the same thing as a return. Don't worry about sticking to a very specific English translation. We're both talking about returning back somewhere. And I'm currently in Japan, but my home, in a sense, as in it will always be my home, is America. And so if I go back to my parents' house, I might say, Jimoto is a way to refer to where you grew up. I might say I return to, where I grew up, where I was born. Jimoto ni kaerimasu. I could also say, as the page shows, America ni kaerimasu. Now, America in itself is not my home. It's not like, wow, my home is the size of a country. It's that it is in my head or in my heart, it's home. Now, there's a few other ways we can use this. And, so we talked about places that you're currently living. Whether it's a house, it's a dorm, it's where you used to live, but still in your heart, it's kind of home. Or it's a country. These all work. You can also say, let's say you're at a hotel. You're at a hotel for a few days. For that time, that's home to you. And I kind of think of it this way. Another way you can think of home is where you're going to sleep for the night. Your planned place of sleep. Not in all situations, but, you go to Tokyo and you're staying in a youth hostel or you're staying in a hotel, or if you're adventurous, you're going to one of the capsule hotels. And you might say, okay, we finished eating, we finished drinking, we went to the Sanrio store. Let's go, let's go home. Let's go back to the hotel. And so you could say, hoteru ni kaerimasu. You're returning back to this home, temporary or permanent. So, kairu, yes, it means to return home, but also no. Or rather, yes, it means home, but what is home? Home is not as strict as you would not say home if, you were speaking about hotel in English. Home is home. There's only one home. However, in Japanese, this kairimasu gives you a bit more flexibility. Now, I mentioned it earlier, so maybe some of you can remember this. Is there another verb that you can think of that refers to returning or to go back? Go back might be the way that you learned it. Modoru. Yes. So modoru, depending on, let's see what Renshu has. Let's see what Renshu's first definition tells us. To turn back, return. Okay, I'm looking at number 2. I'm looking at the number 2. To return, to go back. If it's not home, if it's not this home concept we talked about, you can use modoru. So, you might be at the park and then you have to go to the 7-Eleven because we love 7-Eleven. And then you finish and you say, okay, I'll return to the park now. Koen ni modorimasu. Or if you're out for lunch and then you have to go back to work, shigoto ni modorimasu. So kairu is the more restrictive of the two. Kairu is attached to home or that concept of home. Modoru is just your general going back. And as you see, it works the same way. Modoru is an action of motion, of movement from one place to another. So we're going to use that ni, or we can use the a if we'd like. And you know what? That's it. That's our lesson today. It was a bit short, so let's take this opportunity to practice a little bit more. We worked with the ikimasu earlier. So here's what I'm going to do. Once you get more advanced, I usually don't think that translation activities are particularly useful, but when we're still trying to nail down those basics, they can be helpful. So I'm going to give you a few sentences and try and think through which verb you use, and once we do a few, I'll make it a bit harder, which particle you use. Do we use the ni or do we use the a? And just as a refresher, so we've got those 3. That's all we're doing. And if I say a sentence and you don't know the other word, like the location, just put it in English and try and get the rest of the sentence out. So if I say, the factory, let's go to the factory, and you're like, that I haven't learned factory, then just do this. Just say factory nikimasu. That's an effort. That's making an effort to get as much as you can out, and that helps. All of it is best, but this is more than nothing. And that's definitely worthwhile. And like before, I'd like to see the same answer come up many, many times. So if 1, 2, 4, 7, 10 people have typed the answer and you want to type it, you should type it. Okay? All right, let's start. We're keeping it simple. The subject is going to be I for all of these. So no, you don't need watashi wa. Just leave that out. Let's see. I go to school. I go to school. And I'm not going to say yes or no, and so, people can still think. And if anyone is typing the English and then they see the Japanese before or after them, then hey, it's a chance to pick up that new word. So it's perfect. Looking good, everyone. By the way, if you're ever, this is a bit of an aside, but since we have time, if you're ever teaching, if any of you are teaching now or take up the role of teaching in the future, or you're just trying to help out a friend, like learn Japanese, don't underestimate how much time people need to think about things. In the sense that it might take someone half a second to think, "Gakko ni ikimasu." It might take them 10, 15, 20 seconds. And don't dump the answer out immediately afterwards. I had a teacher when I was teaching here in Japan that was teaching English, and they would say something like, "I go to school, "Gakko ni ikimasu." And there was no break between the English and the Japanese, so the students had no chance to think about the Japanese on their own and say, "Oh, I think," or excuse me, think about the English on their own and try and form the Japanese on their, in their heads. The Japanese came almost immediately, so there's no chance for them to gauge whether they understood it or not. And just like song lyrics, when you hear a song and then you hear the lyrics, you're like, "Oh, I know these lyrics." But if you try and sing it yourself, you realize, "Oh, I don't know any of them at all." You can trick yourself or trick others into thinking they know something. But the chance to think, the time to think is so vital in learning. So if you're ever working with someone else, it's so important to give them a good chunk of time to think about it. Good chunk of time. All right. Teacher rant over. Let's get back to let's give a few other things. Okay. I return to my house or to the house. I return to my house. I return to the house. Oh, and if any of you would like to punish yourselves, the next lesson today is on the passive voice, which is a particularly tricky conjugation form. But that big Kalchan reminder aside, I see some people are using ni, some people are using e. That's good. Uchi ni kaerimasu. That's fine. You could even say, you could say ie ni kaerimasu. That would be okay. There wouldn't be anything wrong with that. You're referring more to the house than to the home, but still, that would be okay. Uchi is probably a bit more common. Okay, I'm going to bump up the difficulty just a little bit. I'm going to put in a subject, which means you're going to need to get one of these in the front. Put whoever it is doing the thing up there, and then add your, location and then, the action. Okay. Let's say the teacher comes to school. The teacher comes to school. It's just coincidence, but The first three answers use three different ways of writing it, which I just wanted to point out in case some of you might be wondering which one is correct. Is one of them correct and other ones are not correct? When we write Japanese in a native setting, naturally, I guess you could say, there's no spaces in between the words. But when you are focusing on beginners to the language, and that doesn't just include foreigners, us, it also includes children, then you also see spaces. And the one that was spoilered, if you look at Shoyu's answer, that one is a very common spacing method that you see in books, children's books. And I particularly like it because it always hooks the particle onto the word before it and then puts a space. And it helps you chunk the sentence into each of its components. You have the subject or the topic, sensei. You have the destination, gakko, and then you have the action. But none of them are wrong. And you might feel compelled to put spaces when you're dealing with just hiragana to help you read it, because reading all hiragana is truly a pain, even for native speakers, I think. And once you get the kanji down, it becomes much, much easier. Excuse me. Okay, let's do a couple more. Let's say, and here's a tricky one because the spelling is kind of hard on this one. Mom goes to Tokyo. Mom or mother. You can choose any level of formality. Mom or mother goes to Tokyo. Just curious, while people are typing on answers, how many of you have been to Tokyo? So the reason I ask, I'm not trying to make you feel sad, is that not if, but when, I'm gonna be positive, when you all go to Tokyo, you will realize one thing, especially if you take the Shinkansen, the bullet train, out somewhere else, or you pay attention to Tokyo when you fly in. It is absolutely gigantic. It is bigger than you can possibly conceive. It just goes on and on and on, and I think you're on this high speed Shinkansen for 30 minutes and you still don't get out of Tokyo. You're out of the Tokyo proper, the official government designated area of Tokyo, but Greater Tokyo it's beyond comprehension. And the reason I say that is because of the spelling of Tokyo. And a lot of people, myself included, you always worry about, wait, is it the short sound or is it the long sound? So is it to or is it to? Is it kyo or is it kyo? And Tokyo is way too big to not have those short vowels. Those short vowels can't possibly encompass how big Tokyo is. So if you're trying to remember Tokyo, it's got to and kyo because that's how gigantic it is. It's huge. And everyone to tap the no button or the crying call-chan, when that day comes, and it will, you will understand that. But it is really big. Too big for me. I love visiting, but I could never live there. It's just, it breaks my brain to think about the size of it. Okay, I think. Oh, one more. Last one. Let's pretend that if you're American, then you might remember this game. It's very old, but Oregon Trail, which was it was a game from many years ago about heading west, heading west. From the original colonies on the east coast of the United States. So, say I go west, or I head west. That's our last sentence for today. And that picture actually doesn't get even a little bit of Tokyo. It's so much bigger than that. That's nothing. That's as far as the eye can see. And the eye can see so little. And Tokyo goes so much further than that. But yes, back to the sentence. I go west, or I head west. You probably wouldn't say I go west, but let's use that for the example. I go west. But I see everyone picking up on that distinction we made earlier, which is great because we're talking about direction and not a destination. We need that A. Wonderful. So we're going to wrap things up today. And if you are wondering why everyone else gets it so well and you just can't get this to stick in your head, don't worry. Don't worry at all. Particles take time. They really, really take time. And they sink in for some people, they don't for others. And as long as you kind of understood parts, but you don't really remember it, that's more than you were, 45 minutes ago. And that's a good step. And this answers to answer, I believe it was Honey Road's question from earlier. If you don't want to look at our hour-long video, but you want to check these lessons out again, they are inside of Renshu. If you go to the menu, and the name is changing next month, but it'll still be in the same place. Underneath resources, it's Japanese basics. And oh, I got a new level. Great. And if you're on the new version of Renshu, you can actually see the little video markers next to each of these that we have videos for. But basics is what we're doing right now. And we just covered this section right here. And Honey Road, to answer your question, 2 lessons ago, basic verbs, the mas and masen. That will dive into the godan and ichidan verb categories that we talked about. And so definitely take a look at these. We do have a video for this up in the server events channel at the top of our Discord server. So if you want a quick look at it, check out the lesson in Renshu. If you want a slow look at it and you can stand my voice for 45 minutes, then definitely check out the video and that should help you. Otherwise, thank you so much everyone for joining us. And again, if you need to, this video will be posted up afterwards. And so you can view it again at that time. Thanks everyone.